First of all, I want to open up the discussion by talk a little bit the latest news today. Aleppo is being claimed to be quote-unquote liberated by the Syrian government. And therefore, how much do you think this news is being reflected, Professor Tavrovsky from Russia, in the annual press conference given by the president?
Well, actually, the foreign policy issues were not very prominent during the press conference. What was most interesting and important was maybe the domestic policy and certain criticism which was sounded by some journalists because, our foreign policy is very successful. Russia is strong. Russia is respected, and both Americans and some Europeans want to mend relations with Russia. But the problem is with the economics, and it's not the sanctions. It's our, yes.
It seems that you are shying a little bit away from my question. My question is, how much is the issue of Syria and Aleppo is actually being mentioned in the press conference? How much does it reveal about the future Moscow's potential of dealing with the region? That's my question, Professor.
Actually, the Syrian situation and the Aleppo situation is not that important. It cannot influence the entire foreign policy of Russia. It cannot influence our future relations with the presidency, with Trump's presidency.
All right.
It's just an episode.
It's an episode. Do you agree with that, Mr. Kozyrev, professor from the U.S.? Of course, during the press conference, if I remember right, President Putin mentioned several things. He talked about the leaders of Turkey and Iran playing key role in terms of guarantee the liberation of the Aleppo, but at the same time, he also said, I don't want to sound immodest, but without Russia's participation, none of these could be achieved. Exactly what role do you think Russia has played? Is it right for the President Putin to claim the credit?
Yes, of course. I think that without Russia's support, military support, the Assad troops wouldn't be so successful. And I disagree with Professor Tavrovsky saying that it is just an episode. It's an important milestone, and that might lead to political reconciliation or some sort of talks which are being planned probably in Kazakhstan in the near future. So I think that the Russian participation has been key.
At this point, Professor, you might know that Iran, Syria, Assad, and Turkey have all agreed on Astana as the venue for Syria talks from now on, the Kazakh capital, of course, that is. And Putin said the next step should be all Syria ceasefire deals. How much role do you think Russia will play vis-a-vis that of the United States? After all, this peace deal has not been negotiated down by the U.S., and there has been a change of administration in the very near future. What is likely to be the strength between the two capitals, given what Mr. Putin just said?
I believe that what Russia
Professor Kozyrev.
I believe that what Russia has been I believe what Russia has been trying is to engage many times on multiple venues in multiple occasions the United States, and there has been some effective cooperation between the military of the United States and Russia in this respect. And I believe that probably Russia will continue, include and of course invite the United States as part of the whole chess game to attain this goal of settlement, political settlement in Syria.
Really? Inviting United States to be part of the chess game? Wow, that's quite an interesting way of putting it. Professor Tavrovsky, you want to respond to that? Is that possible?
Yes, but anyway, we should wait for the inauguration because the events can take any direction. Let's wait because President Trump is rather unpredictable.
Well, What Professor Tavrovsky mentioned to us, that is when he's being asked, what about the relations between Russia and the United States? President Putin said, well, it's hard to say. And he's saying it couldn't get worse because it's already the worst. But given what is happening now in Aleppo and Syria, can it be also an interesting starting point for Russia and the United States to work together in certain ways? We don't know how, but can it be an initiative?
Yeah, exactly. Certainly. Now, I think especially from Mr. Putin's perspective, I think it's a new president or the president-elect in United States open a new door, maybe a more possibility than especially his predecessor. I mean, this Obama administration, because so far, indeed, as we know, it looks like Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump, they do have a good feeling with each other. And also from Mr. Trump, during the campaign, he mentioned perhaps a fight against terrorism should be very, very good field for more cooperation between two countries. So I think now maybe the question in Syria is United States and Russia, they could have some more cooperation, but maybe not in the future of the Syria political solution. Certainly they will try to avoid this very, very trouble issue, and they will try to focus on the fight against terrorism.
Well, certainly. The helping hand, shall we use that phrase, in terms of Syria crisis, Russia has played. It's likely, at least in the region, to increase Russia's credibility. And therefore, Mr. Kozyrev, when Russia and the United States both are talking about nuclear weapons, which was mentioned by your president-elect, Mr. Trump, to increase the U.S. nuclear weapon capabilities, President Putin said, we're not there to compete. We don't have the money. We don't have the resources. We're not going to waste it on something we can't do better than the U.S. What do you think of this issue? Is it likely to be a future point of conflict between the two countries?
I believe that we have seen some movement and improvement and some upgrade of nuclear potentials in both countries, and the United States has been announcing some new programs to develop this new generation of nuclear potential, and the Russian government, the Russian military has been very active within the last probably 5-6 years to do the same. I don't see here a deviation from the original previous standpoint where the two biggest nuclear powers were actually trying to kind of find some sort of equilibrium between themselves. And President Putin actually mentioned during his press conference, said that we are operating within the agreements and the treaties which we have signed with the United States. So we're not going beyond. He has been critical of U.S. withdrawal from the anti-ballistic missile treaty by the Bush administration, and this has been, and he has a very interesting elaboration on this, saying that each side is doing its own game. It's playing its own game. It's kind of quiet, tacit consensus in terms of the American side is improving its defense capabilities, and the Russian side is improving some sort of asymmetric response to this. I don't see a big shift here.
Okay, it is extremely interesting, Professor Tavrovsky, that the president-elect Donald Trump in the U.S. talked specifically on his Twitter about U.S. nuclear capabilities, and that is such a shift from the previous policies of the Obama administration. Of course, at this moment, Professor Tavrovsky, you know better than I do that, well, whether he talked about on Twitter is likely to be translated into real policy is another thing, but still, you do see some interesting points of possible conflicts between Russia and the United States. What would you say, Professor?
You know, I don't see any possibility of conflict between Russia and the United States in this sphere. I think that actually we have lived through the worst period and now something should improve. As for Putin, I think he is in a very strong position. His nuclear umbrella is very efficient. He has very efficient armed forces. He enjoys support of his nation. So he can wait for some deeds from the president-elect Trump. The words by Trump are very promising. Yes, they are very interesting and promising. But let's wait for the deeds.
It's very interesting.
Some initiatives, you know.
Some initiatives.
Something positive should be put on the table.
We will have to wait until January the 20th or even a little bit later for Mr. Trump to put out his own policies over there. Probably another big annual press conference, I guess. But Mr. Cui, we talked earlier about Russia's relations with the United States and also its power in the Middle East with Syria as an issue. But what about its relations with Europe? President Putin seems to be speaking much harsher when it comes to Russia's ties now with the EU. What would you say?
Yes, now I think for Europe, it will take maybe some more time to wait for the policy from President Trump after he take office next year. Because so far, during his campaign, he do have some, words or some, commitment about Europe. But it looks like, because now, to much degree, the future or direction, the destiny of Europe depends on how is the relations between US and Russia, especially in Ukraine issue, Syria issue. Also, both of them are very, very big concerns for Europe. One of them for the kind of traditional threat.
Right.
Another one is from the refugee or migration issue. So I think now for Europe, they have to wait for some time. But now the question for Europe and the US is, how could they try to continue this traditional transatlantic relations?
I guess its relations with Russia also depends on how its relations be moving with the United States.
Very complicated balance.
There we go, over there, a lot of balance over there. Professor Kozyrev, of course, when you listen to President Putin this time during his press conference, he talked about Ukraine, and he used one phrase. He said, sooner or later, the diplomatic relations will have to be resumed between Russia and Ukraine. That's an interesting way of putting it. What kind of message should we really get from this?
The message is very clear. Putin has always been consistent in terms of naming the Ukrainian people as a kind of very close to the Russian people and the cultures, civilization-wise. The two peoples have had a very solid history, and he, since the outbreak of the Ukraine crisis in the early 2014, the Russian government and the Russian side actually has never accused of the Ukrainian people of some, something or anything which might really contribute to the split between the Ukrainian and the Russian peoples. So what has been the target is the Ukrainian government, the new government, which is so much reluctant to cooperate with Russia or to even look at Russia as a potential partner. So for the Putin administration and Putin himself, it is not normal. It is not normal. It is temporary. He believes that this is temporarily, kind of deviation from the normal state of affairs, and which is probably which reflects the reality.
Okay, if that is a continuity of what Mr. Putin's words, but what about the choices that the European Union or the European countries could have in terms of its relations with Russia? Professor Tavrovsky, at this moment, sanctions, punishments still coming from European capitals against Russia because of Ukraine, because of other issues. And therefore, how do you think, from the Russian perspective, the EU likely to move given a lot of internal problems they also have among themselves, and also troubles coming from migrants and also terrorism? So with the unpredictability of the U.S. administration, how are the European capitals likely to move toward Moscow, and Moscow react to that?
Well, I think a lot depends on the politics of President Trump, because the European Union is not actually an independent entity. It hears what leaders from Washington tell them to do. So it is also wiser to wait until Trump's administration will start to give directions to Europe. And as for Ukraine, it's also, you know, Ukrainian government is not independent, and it's acting against its national interests. And the national interests of Ukrainian nation is in good relations with Russia. And you know what's interesting? For the couple of weeks, there are crowds coming to the railway stations in Ukrainian cities, and they start to sing Russian songs.
All right.
And Russians also reciprocated. You know, there were several stations and there were several crowds singing Ukrainian songs.
Certainly,
so,
you see.
We really want to have good relations.
Well, we'll see whether the singing of a few crowds are necessarily going to transform into a national movement. But before we go, very brief question for all of you, but very important as well. Today, during the press conference, there were also journalists accusing President Putin of having big mouth, short legs, meaning promising a lot, not necessarily carrying out, particularly when it comes to economy and the internal issues. Professor Kozyrev, very briefly from you, how much do you think President Putin will be able to translate his promise, economy getting better by the end of next year, really into reality? Very briefly.
It's hard. It's hard due to lack of probably the kind of power vertical and the mix of kind of state-owned and private corporations, and it's hard to get to a consensus. So I believe that in terms of developing this program of reform and implementing this program of reform is pretty hard to do. So the many Russian businesses and hoping that there will be probably some sort of improvement in terms of engaging with a relationship with China in the future.
We'll see whether that's really the solution. Mr. Cui, final words from you.
Yes, domestic economy always a weak point for Mr. Putin. But maybe now the good news for him is now the oil price is getting rise.